All right, guys, I'm here with Dr. Malcolm Ball. He hates being called doctor, even though he's a doctor, he's a scientist, and he is the man behind Gut Performance, actually. So, Malcolm, I wanted to talk to you and I guess shed some more light and information out there on Gut Performance. I think it's an amazing supplement, and I'm very skeptical with supplements, but this is something that I trialed in my prep and continue to keep taking out of prep because I feel and see the difference in my overall well-being, my digestion. I know that I'm breaking down my nutrients. I don't get bloated. And I actually, that with magnesium powder is one of my, I guess, recipes for recovery. What is Gut Performance?
So Gut Performance is a combination of several high-value foods. So unlike things like vitamin tablets or simple fiber supplements, we've actually gone to the whole foods. But when we selected these foods, we actually did a series of biochemical analysis. We did some trials to make sure that they were foods that people actually work. So they are the equivalent of a super vitamin, if you like, in terms of how do they work. But the reason why they work the way that they do is because they're a combination of these foods. So the three major components that do much the heavy lifting are whole beetroot powder, a sugarcane derivative, and red sorghum, which is a gluten-free traditional, or what they call an ancient grain.
So why those three ingredients?
When you combine all three of them together, you essentially get a very good proportion of the nutrients that most people are deficient in. So whenever people sort of talk about food, they tend to talk about protein, carbohydrates, fats, and very simple vitamins like the B vitamins and the C vitamins. And don't get me wrong, they're very important. But those are kind of the things that keep you alive. They're not the things that make you function really well, if that makes sense. So the foods that we've selected have the other things that your body needs to work really well. You mentioned magnesium, for example. So the reason why magnesium is so important, particularly to athletes like yourself, is it's one of the major components in how your muscles function properly. And it's also something which gets used and excreted from your body. So it's something you've got to constantly replace. The three foods that we've selected are very high in a lot of those other things. So they're very high in things like chromium, which your body uses to
digest carbohydrates,
digest carbohydrates, but on a much more fundamental level, just function. So your metabolism requires chromium to function. It's something which is very hard to get in the modern diet because it's destroyed by processing. And it's something which just happens to be rich in one of the foods that we've selected. So it's not added. The chromium supplements are a good example of why supplementation is not a great idea. If you take something like chromium picolinate or any of the others, they've actually shown in scientific trials that you absorb somewhere between 0.5% and 3% of the amount that you take. If you get it in your food, however, you absorb all of it, or at least all that you need. And so you have to have a high chromium food to replenish your chromium. So it's the complexity of the foods which makes them valuable. They're not simple, they're not just a vitamin C, it's got all of those things in it, but it's in them in the way that our body uses. And that's why I've selected those three, because they cover most of what you need, or most of what most people need, I guess I should say.
So just before this, we were talking about beetroot and I guess the benefits of beetroot, and you were speaking about how it's different to have the beetroot powder compared to beetroot juice, because there has been studies on beetroot juice in athletes, and they were seeing benefits from having that post-training, I think it was what I read. But you're saying that having the beetroot powder has all the fibre, contains all the fibre in it.
Right. So one of the things that's really interesting about the way that our bodies work, and it's kind of counterintuitive because there's a lot on, these NutriBullets and things like that about blend everything up because it's easy to absorb. But our bodies don't actually want foods that are easy to absorb. That's why we have intestines which are so long. So if you look at things like cats, for example, that only eat meat, they have very short intestines because they absorb their food really, really quickly. Humans are very similar to, chimpanzees and dogs and things like that, where we eat both vegetables and meat, and we have a very long intestine to absorb those nutrients over the space of the whole intestine. And you get a different result if you absorb it slowly than if you absorb it fast. And again, they've actually shown this in scientific trials. So if you just take all of the same nutrients and you make them hard to absorb and easy to absorb, you get a different physiological result. And contrary to what you would think, you get a better result if they're hard to absorb. So I don't mean hard to absorb from the point of view of things like supplements where your body just doesn't have the mechanism in place to do it. What I mean is, over time, your body wants to break down the foods and absorb it along the entire length of the intestine. So don't get me wrong, beetroot juice is great. It's a healthy food and all the rest of it. But if you have whole beetroot powder, you get all of the benefits of beetroot juice, plus it's breaking down the fibre over the entire length of the gut, and it's being slowly absorbed over the entire length of the gut. The reason why that's quite important for a lot of people, particularly people who are overweight and things like that, is a lot of the hormones that control hunger and your metabolism and all those sort of things are actually produced in the back of your gut. So if you are eating foods which are very easy to absorb, and you're absorbing all of the food in the front of your gut, you're getting a signal from the back of your gut saying, I'm starving. So this is why even things like simple fiber supplements fill you up, because things go all the way along and they start to stimulate these hormones saying, I've actually eaten something. And again, this is all very clearly proven. It's very good science. There's no real doubt about it. The only thing that anybody ever really argues about is, well, how much of a difference do these things make? There's nobody out there that doesn't, in the scientific community at least, that doesn't understand that these hormones are produced in the back of the gut, not the front of the gut. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And beetroot also has an impact on opening up the vessels, in our blood, so it helps with transportation, particularly post-training.
Yeah, so one of the things that happens when you put your body under stress, any kind of stress, exercise being one of them, is as your body is sort of pulling nutrients into its core to protect itself, it tends to close up blood vessels, your intestines function not as well, and all of those kind of things. It's a very, very mild fight or flight syndrome, if you like, when you exercise. And that's designed to make things push hard and not get damaged as much if you do get into a fight. That also depletes a lot of, when you do it with exercise, it depletes a lot of the nutrients that your body then needs to be able to reopen them again. So there's a thing in your body called nitric oxide, which is one of the major signals that vascular dilates. It's also a very potent antioxidant, does a lot of antioxidant. But the main thing that it does physiologically is push those blood vessels back out. But to make nitrous oxide, your body needs a whole pile of nutrients. And if it doesn't have those nutrients, it just can't make the nitric oxide. So beetroot is one of the foods that has the micronutrients that your body needs to get that pathway going. So that's why it does the vascular dilation. And it's important to remember that these kind of things are very different to, say, hypertensive drugs and things like that. So it's not the same as taking a drug, because what a drug does is it forces your body to do something whether it wants to or not. Whereas taking high nutrient foods or even supplements, what it does is give your body something that needs to do something but wants to do but can't. And so, effectively you can't overdose on beetroot juice. You can make yourself very sick by drinking so much that, everything turns purple and all the rest of it. But you can't overdose it in the same way that you can a medicine. Which is why, in a lot of these circumstances, it doesn't matter so much if you're taking 5 times as much vitamin as you need or these kind of things. It does become a problem down the track if you take too much for too long. Vitamin C is a really good example of that. A lot of people take way more vitamin C than they should because it is dangerous if you take it excessive amounts for long periods of time, and they've shown that quite clearly. But when you're taking food, your body just doesn't use it. It just doesn't absorb it if it doesn't need it. So it just passes through you and you don't get it. Which again comes back to why it's much more important to take, say, whole beetroot juice or whole beetroot powder than a beetroot extract.
Yeah.
Because once you pull everything else out, you screw around with your body's ability to decide what it needs and what it doesn't. So one of the sort of basic concepts of biochemistry, which doesn't really get talked about a lot, which is really important to these kind of things, is this idea of forcing pathways. If you give your body a huge excess of something, it will force your body to think it needs it, even if it doesn't. And this is why things like high-dose vitamin C and things, which, don't get me wrong, is great if you're sick. Taking high-dose vitamin C if you've got a cold or something like that has been shown to have a benefit regardless of what people that are against vitamin C. It's been proven in scientific trials to have a benefit, but that's only good for 3 or 4 days. You don't want to be having high-dose vitamin C all of the time because it forces your body to do things it doesn't want to do. But the foods don't do that. So if you eat too much of it, you don't feel well and you stop eating it. But it doesn't have any other effect on your body. And that's why we've stayed very tightly in the food space rather than the supplement space.
That's really interesting because I in my prep this year I ate so much beetroot, particularly post-training. I guess that was one of the reasons I reached out to you and said, let's put some, there's been a lot of studies on beetroot. I mean, a lot of beetroot. Let's put that into gut performance. And I think it's worked very well. I want to touch base on the second, I guess I think is the main star of gut performance, the sugarcane pulp, sugarcane powder. Most people would be like, oh, sugarcane, and would just be a little, I guess, confused about that as an ingredient. Can you talk to us about what is the difference between, just sugarcane and the sugarcane pulp, which is actually full of micronutrients and multiple fiber strands?
Sure. There's a lot of misinformation on both sides of the sugar industry. So the two extremes that you get are sugar's good for you, it's great, there's no problem with it, which is clearly not true. But the other side of it, which is also absolutely not true, is all sugars are the same. So sugars are essential to your body's function. Literally every part of your body utilizes sugar. It's not just about energy metabolism. The thing that makes sugarcane, or sucrose, I should say, the sugar that we think of as table sugar, not so good for you, is it's a type of sugar which they call a non-reducing sugar. It doesn't really matter what that makes it, but these non-reducing sugars our body don't utilize very well. And so it screws around with our machinery quite a lot. But sugarcane itself is actually really good for you. Sugarcane is one of the oldest listed medicines in the world. It actually exists in the oldest surviving medical text as a treatment for hangovers and diabetes and inflammation. And that's because the sugarcane itself is very high in nutrition, as you say. It has a lot of micronutrients. It has a lot of different types of fibers. So it's got lignin, it's got insoluble fiber, it's got hemicellulose, and all of these things have been shown to be very good for us over time in the last few years. But it's also very high in B vitamins, it's high in the good kinds of sugars. And what we actually do, or what our partners actually do, is remove the sucrose from the sugarcane and leave all of the other stuff. Now, strictly speaking, we don't really need to do that, but because sugar is so demonized, we took it out just to make life easier for everybody. But it also means we can control it a lot more effectively. So the problem that the sugar industry has from our point of view, from the health point of view, is they all grow it for sugar. So the thing that they focus on the most is making sugar, whereas we focus on absolutely everything else and we actually throw away the sugar. So we do a lot of stuff which is not good for the sugar industry because it reduces the amount of sugar. So we pick cane at a different time, and we use varieties of cane which are not the best sugar producers, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. The thing that makes sugarcane really interesting is it's one of the very few plants in the world that we eat the active growing stem of. So if you think about all of the vegetables that you eat, they're either roots or they're leaves, very occasionally, they're actually the stems of the plant. And often we actually remove the stem because it's woody and we don't like it. If you think broccoli, most people leave the stem behind. But the growing part of the plant is the
where most of the nutrients are.
Well, it's the machinery, absolutely, because the plant is using those micronutrients for itself. So roots and fruits and things, they're storage devices. They're the part of the plant that they store the calories in. They store the protein, they store the carbohydrates, they store the fats. The leaves are a little bit more active because, they're photosynthesizing and everything, but the stem is where the plant itself is actually using all the things that it gets out of the ground and gets out of the air and things. And if you think about all of the things that we kind of think of, all's not right, but if you think of many of the things that we think of medicinal, they're actually the leaves or the bark or the stems. Cinnamon, one of the most highly regarded things in the world, is the bark of a tree. And thyme and rosemary, and they're the leaves. The roots, some of the roots are turmeric and ginger, for example, but they're actually strange from a root point of view in that they're not just storage devices. They actually do some things as well. They've got the bacteria and things in them that are active. So the sugarcane is unusual in that it's the storage and the active part is the same. So we remove the storage part, that's sugar, and we keep the stuff that the sugarcane uses to metabolize sugar, which is the other thing which is unusual about sugarcane. Very few plants in the world actually use sugar for metabolism. They don't store their energy as sugar. They store it as starch. So grains and things have starch, and then the roots have starch in them. That's how they store. So one of the few plants in the world that actually has all of the machinery needed to metabolize sugar and do it effectively is sugarcane. There's a couple of others. Sugar beet as well has been shown to have some similar, some same properties, some different properties. And then there's things like sweet sorghum. But sugarcane is the one that we've got the most history of, we've got the most control over, and the most useful. So that's why we use that one.
And how does it work?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, it works in hundreds and hundreds of ways, probably. So the most recent the most recent analysis that we have of the body, there are 9,000 different interactions in 800 specific pathways. And what that basically is the biochemical map of the body. Every single one of those pathways relies on good nutrition to function. So the micronutrients, so for example, zinc is essential for making the enzymes in your body work. So the enzymes are the proteins in your body that actually do things. And a lot of them can't do things without zinc. And magnesium is the same for muscle. Everybody knows about iron in blood. So if there wasn't iron in hemoglobin, it would do nothing. It requires the iron to function. How it works is it just makes everything work a lot better, and it does that in a couple of different ways. The first thing it does is it really feeds the microbes in your gut. So everybody knows every 2 weeks there's another article about how the microbes in your gut affect everything from...
It's like your second brain.
Right, absolutely. From cancer to depression. And it's every day we find out something else that it affects. There's nothing that ever says it doesn't affect anything anymore. A way to look at it is everybody's heard most people have heard the saying, you're only 10% you. For every one cell in humans, there's 10 bacteria or 9 bacteria cells on your body. But another way to look at it is, and a far more effective way to do it is, human beings have about 2.2 million genes. So if you think of a Homo sapien, that's 2.2 million genes. All of the bacteria in our gut have about 14.5 million genes.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
All of the things in the body that happens, 14.5 compared to 2.2 is done by bacteria. So you must have a healthy microbiome to function. And it's one of my favorite sayings is, if we weren't so good at surviving, we'd be a lot healthier.
Yeah.
Because we're exceptionally good at not dying. We're one of the best animals on the planet to not die. If you look at most animals, slightest bit of a problem, they drop dead. Human beings will get to the point.
We're resilient.
Absolutely. Human beings will get to the point where they can barely stand before they start to think about looking after themselves, you know. And so you can have bacteria that are just not doing what they should be doing. You can have your metabolism that's just not functioning the way it should be doing. And a lot of what we call lifestyle diseases, diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, you know, even autoimmune diseases, psoriasis, asthma, and things like that, all basically come down to the fact that our bodies just aren't working the way that they should be working. There's no disease. It's not a disease. It is a malfunction in our body. And more we're understanding that a lot of these things can actually be controlled if you look after yourself properly. Diet and exercise has been long understood as a way to treat diabetes and inflammation and depression and things like that. There's now even evidence that diet and exercise affects several different types of cancer, because it affects your body's ability to deal with the cancer. And a large part of that is fixing your microbiome, fixing the microbes in your gut. And so that's really one of the major functions that we do. That's where the fiber and the micronutrients, several of the micronutrients come in. And another thing that's really important about our body is a lot of what we use in our body is not what we eat. It's actually what the bacteria eat and then excrete. It's what they call secondary metabolites. So things like polyphenol antioxidants, for example. Everybody's heard of polyphenol antioxidants. There's thousands and thousands of tablets out there, and lots of foods that claim to be superfoods based on their polyphenols and all the rest of it. We now know that we actually don't use polyphenols, or at least we don't use some of them. What we use, some particular types of beneficial bacteria in our gut eat the polyphenols, and we use what comes out of that process. So it doesn't matter how many of these polyphenols you take, if you don't have those bacteria in your gut, you don't get them out.
Interesting. And so how do you populate, or how do you know?
Yeah, so
and how does gut performance improve the microbiome?
Yeah, most people have at least some of these good bacteria in their gut. There are some people that are just incredibly compromised. People that require, very extensive antibiotics, for example, or sometimes people with ulcerative colitis and stuff like that. But most people have at least some of these bacteria in their gut. They're just not being fed properly, and what we call the bad bacteria are just running the show, basically. So when you start taking things like gut performance and you're feeding those good bacteria and you're effectively starving the bad bacteria, what happens is those populations start to rebalance into the way that they should have been. Mm-hmm. And so very few people don't have what they need to get back. It seems. It's still, we don't know exactly what's going on there, so there's still a lot to sort of learn about this stuff. But almost everybody can benefit from a really good, what they call a prebiotic. So a prebiotic is literally something that feeds the good bacteria in your intestines, and that's one of the major things that gut performance is. So if you do have compromise, then you can start taking things like probiotics, which is the actual bacteria that are beneficial. The problem with a lot of probiotics is that they simply don't work. They're not the right bacteria, they're not made the right way. So you've got to get a really good high value probiotic for it to be effective. And again, this has been shown quite clearly. So a lot of the sort of negativity against natural therapies and things like that come from the fact that a lot of things that they test are very low quality. Yeah. If you actually take the time to break up the things that work and the things that don't work, Well, the things that work are very high quality prebiotics, very high quality probiotics, very high. The problem, of course, is there's not a lot of regulation out there. So scientific quality and product quality are not actually the same thing. Just because somebody charges a lot of money for something doesn't mean it works at all. I mean, a really good example of that was that for one of the other studies that I was asked to be involved in, we had a look at the various types of cocoa and raw cacao. So again, everybody knows cacao is good for you and cocoa's evil and all the rest of it. When we did the actual analysis, the difference between the bad cocoa and the best cocoa was about 10%, and the bad cocoa was 10% better than the good cocoa. So you really, one of the problems and one of the reasons why we need things like gut performance is it's very hard to get this stuff by chance. Yeah. So even when people are saying eat well, you know, one of the things that I hear all the time as a scientist in the space is, oh, but if I ate well, I wouldn't need your product. And the answer is absolutely. If you ate properly, you would not need this product. But you're not eating properly, are you? Because you take my product and you feel better. And that comes down to the fact that there's very little in this world about food quality. Yeah. There's a lot about food safety. Everything about not dying. Very little of it is about actually proving that your product works. And that's the difference between things like gut performance, and there are other things out there that do it as well, is you take the time to actually prove it does something.
So why is gut performance so unique? There are many products. I get now, as I think, gut is like the new black. It's like what everyone's talking about. And so obviously there's a lot of gut products on the market that will say they do one thing. What is it that makes gut performance, other than it being a food supplement, not so much just a supplement, so it's all natural? What do you think it makes it so unique?
Yeah, well, this comes down to some of the other ways that it works, and you've got to look at things historically to understand the way that this works. I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy theories and, you know, big pharma's trying to kill us and all that kind of rubbish. None of that's really true from the scientific point of view. It might be true from the commercial point of view, but historically, we all wanted to make things simple. So from a scientific point of view, you're told break it down, break it down, break it down, break it down until you find the one thing that does the job. Mm-hmm. And that worked quite well for a couple of 100 years. You know, things like aspirin is something that's found in willow bark, going back to bark that's being one of the medicinal things. People used to eat willow bark and to get rid of a headache, but it used to give them stomachache because of all the other stuff that was in the bark. So what they did was they separated out the salicylic acid, they made it into aspirin, and it works without any of the side effects. That's a very, what we call a chemical engineering way of thinking, simplify things down. And it still works for a lot of things. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm very pro-pharmaceuticals. I used to make pharmaceuticals before I got into the space. I don't for one second want to pretend that pharmaceuticals aren't a good thing when they're used properly. But when you're talking about nutrition and the microbiome and metabolism, you just simply can't simplify it down to one thing. And almost everybody out there is still trying to do that. And that's why when you look at supplements and things like that, they say extract of grape equivalent to, you know, but it's not equivalent to it. You know, they say 500 milligrams of resveratrol equivalent to 100 grams of grape, but it's not equivalent to it. It's only equivalent to it in the amount of resveratrol that's in it. It's not equivalent to all of the other things that are in grapes that make them good for you. Mm-hmm. We took the exact opposite position, which was you can't simplify these things down. What you have to do is find the complex foods that you can guarantee will always have the things that you need. And that's quite difficult. One of the reasons why they do simplify things down is because it's easy. It's easy, relatively easy. I should be fair to them. It's quite hard to do it right the first time. But it's easy to make something the same every time if it's simple. Yeah. You know, if all you've got is soluble fiber, then all you have to worry about is soluble fiber. If you have a product that has 100 different things in it, well, you've got 100 things that you've got to worry about. And so even these things which claim to be complex, what they are is a bunch of simple things that they've added together. And as we said, that's not the same thing. Using red wine and grape skins as an example, again, most people have heard of resveratrol and how good it is for you, and glass of red wine is good for you, and those kind of things. When they do clinical trials on resveratrol, it does very little. And that's because a glass of wine has something like 180 different things that are similar to resveratrol. Resveratrol just happens to be the one that is most common in the red wine. And there's a historical thing of, well, the most common thing must be the one that's doing the job. Mm. And that just simply isn't the case. So when people say, well, what's the active in gut performance? I said, I've got no idea.
Yeah.
I know all of the things that are in it that do something.
Yeah.
But if you were to ask me which one did which thing, I couldn't possibly tell you. The analogy that I like to use is a soundboard. So when you're listening to an orchestra or a piece of music with a soundboard, there's two ways that the music can be bad. The first way is one of the dials is off by like 100%. And you're just getting a screech or feedback or whatever. And that's what pharmaceuticals are for. And they do that very well. They take that one dial and they push it back down to where it should be, and then people get better. But the other way you can have bad music is you can have 50 or 60 or 100 of those dials all off by 3%. And the music will be terrible, but there's no one dial that you can push to make the music good again. Mm-hmm. You've got to adjust all 100 of them by 3%. And that's what medical nutrition does. And gut performance is a medical nutrition product. What it does is give your body what it needs to adjust all of those dials.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's great.
And that extends to why a supplement doesn't work. Because a supplement is still only pushing 3 or 4 of those dials.
And the rest
even though it's natural or whatever, it's still too simple to get the job done. And that's why the medical foods work better than the supplements. And it's also why we can sort of get away with not knowing what is the active, because there's so many different things in there. Or maybe what you need is not exactly what I need. But if we
it's feeding what we need individually,
as opposed to being exactly the same. But it doesn't matter. We can both take gut performance and get the benefit. It's why some people take it for, or some people will take it for psoriasis. Some people will take it for bloating. Some people will take it for constipation. Some people, because they're not all caused by the same individual thing, but they all are all the same problem, which is your body not getting the nutrition it needs to survive. Now, what we're trying to do is effectively garden in a jar, I guess, is another way of looking at it.
Little gut fertilizer is what I like to call it.
Absolutely. And that's a very good way of looking at it. So if we go back to probiotics and prebiotics, the probiotics are the seed. And if you don't have the seed, no amount of fertilizer is going to make anything grow. Sometimes people don't have the seed. But it doesn't matter if you've got the seed if you don't have the fertilizer either. And that's what the gut performance is. It's the fertilizer. It's the thing that feeds those bugs in your gut, and they do the job for us. They do the work for us. It also has a lot of micronutrients that we do use directly, though. So we've also shown that a lot of the things that are in it, the bacteria don't use, we do use. So it's not just that. That's a big part of it. And then the other side of it is the fact that it is hard to digest. It is slow release, and it is released over the entire length of the intestines and the colon and things. And a paper was just released quite recently, which was interesting, where they actually showed that taking the wrong kind of probiotic is actually bad for you, because, of course, probiotics are supposed to be bacteria that are in your colon, which is all the way at the end. And you're taking them in your stomach, and they're populating your stomach and populating your small intestine and causing problems. Whereas if you feed the ones that are already there with something that goes all the way along, well, now you get some benefit. Another way to look at it, the difference between, say, a fibre supplement and something like gut performance is...
Are you talking about for example, Metamucil
Yeah.
or psyllium husk.
Right, psyllium husk or, Benefiber or any of those. Benefiber and psyllium husk and things like that, they're the equivalent of white bread. Okay, so fiber is what the good bacteria in our gut eat to survive. So it's their carbon source. So if you're not eating anything, white bread's better than nothing.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong, fiber supplements will do a job. They'll do a little bit of a job. Eating white bread is better than starving to death. But it's not as good as eating a type of salad. The bacteria need all the micronutrients and everything as well. They don't just need carbohydrate. They don't just need carbon source. They need all of the things that they need to have good function. And that's the difference between something like Gut Performance and a fiber supplement. So it's the combination of everything that makes a difference. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
That was a great answer, though. Many great, and now very good analogies in there. Actually, I think that most people can go, I get that now. I guess one, when we first started talking about putting together this product, my biggest thing was recovery. If I can recover better, I can train harder. I can keep training. So I don't need something to make me train or to stimulate me more. I wanted, the other end. And I guess that's what when I look at Gut Performance, it really does help me recover from all the training, because I guess there's been studies showing that people that excessively exercise can create gut issues like leaky gut, and also the amount of inflammation and breakdown of toxins and metabolic waste that happens in the body through training. If you're not getting rid of that, you're just almost creating or keeping hormones in the body that need to be excreted.
Sure.
So what's your what am I trying to say? What's your advice on, I guess, people that are training a lot and getting digestive issues, feeling some people get constipation, bloating, a lot of inflammation. Do you highly recommend that Gut Performance is a great product for them to use? Yeah,
sure. So one of the very sort of basic concepts of biochemistry is what we call hierarchies of need. So going back to our body is very good at surviving. When we talked about those 800 pathways, those 800 pathways have a lot of common things that they need, but your body will always prioritize them based on what they think is most important. So from a biochemical point of view, pretty much everything that we do is about not dying, if that makes sense. So when you exercise, when you lift weights, you trick your body into thinking that it needs more muscle to not die. That's literally what you're doing from a biochemical point of view. And what that does is it pushes build muscle all the way up to the top of the hierarchy of need. Because your body goes, oh my God, I can't lift this weight. If I don't lift this weight, I'm going to die. I'm going to pack on more muscle to get it. If you run faster, you run marathons, it goes, oh my God, I can't get away from what I've got to run away from. I've got to get better. And this is how we get better and better and better. But biochemically, part of that process is then going, okay, that's not, the other stuff isn't important. So a really common example, a really easy example of this is the fact that elite athletes get sick quite a lot. And one of the reasons for that is because the same amino acid, which is essential to muscle growth, is essential to your immune system. So if you're doing everything that you need, everything that you can to build athletic performance, your body will go, maybe I don't need to protect myself from being sick. So this amino acid is what they call an essential amino acid, which means you have to get it from the diet. And so if you're not getting enough in your diet, your body will stop protecting itself from disease because it will spend all of its resources on muscle.
Yeah.
And this happens in pretty much everything that we've ever studied so far. It always shifts depending on what it decides at the moment is most important. So when we're talking about recovery is nutrient deficiency, lack of recovery is a large part of nutrient deficiency. So are things like leaky gut. What's happening is your body is not protecting your body is not replacing its joints. The toxins which are involved are not being cleared fast enough, which are causing the leaky gut syndrome. If you are able to supplement yourself, and I use that word scientifically, not commercially. So if you're able to supplement your diet sufficiently, whether it be through good food or things like gut performance, or even things like vitamins and other stuff, then your body has the engineering it needs to then be able to do everything.
Yeah.
And that's why things like leaky gut will go away and you'll recover faster. And because as you say, the recovery, when you destroy muscle, the amino acids which are destroyed get turned into amines. They have to be cleared through urea. Your body needs all of the things that it associated with getting rid of those things. And if it can't, well, they just build up and they cause damage. So absolutely, gut performance and things like that will help with all of those kind of things, and not just things like elite athlete recovery and stuff like that. Most people in certainly our world, what we like to call the Western world, are deficient in several things, which means that they don't recover. So people that always wake up tired, for example, people that have bloating, have constipation, these are all because the body is not functioning properly. And if you give the body what it needs to function properly, it will solve those problems most of the time. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be some hippie crystal guy saying all you need to do is eat right and you'll never get sick or anything like that. What I'm saying is these lifestyle conditions have lifestyle solutions as well. Yeah. But even things like medications, they don't work properly if your body doesn't have the nutrition it needs to make use of them. They don't act on their own. They have to go through the same pathways.
There's always chemical reactions.
Right, absolutely. So now there is a huge push in the pharmaceutical space to actually come up with food supplements to take with the medication to make them work better and reduce the side effects. There's a number of papers which were published over the last sort of 18 months where they've shown things like a very common example is a lot of the diabetes medications deplete B12. So people that have diabetes are very often B12 deficient. Now, they originally thought it was just a sort of something that happened, but they now realize that the medications that you take use a lot of B12. So if you're taking the medications and not supplementing with B12, you deplete B12 and things go wrong. So now it's part of the therapeutic recommendation to not just take these medications, but to take B12 supplementation. Yeah. And that, to a greater or lesser extent, happens with absolutely everything.
That was awesome. So what, because I think a lot of people like to self-diagnose, particularly when they hear something happening. They seem to have all the symptoms suddenly. But what are some of the symptoms of gut issues?
Well, there's the obvious ones. So bloating, constipation, incontinence, but also things like just pain. But
depression's also linked to.
I was just about to say, but there are some very not obvious ones as well. Like anxiety has now been very tightly linked to gut health. Depression, as you say, even things like, to a lesser degree, now talking about sort of OCD, autism is known to have gut links now as well. So I mean, you can be flippant about it and say, if you're not feeling right for any reason, the first place to go is to fix your gut. And it's probably not flippant. Yeah. I mean, we actually do understand for things like depression, we understand how that works quite well. So serotonin is the molecule in the body that many people have heard of that is a neurotransmitter. And when you talk about neurotransmitters, everybody thinks depression or anxiety or drug addiction or whatever. But serotonin, the primary function of serotonin is actually to make your intestines work. So
wow. I did not know that.
70% of the serotonin in your body is used for digestion.
What?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
So, and this is what I'm saying. So, and again,
happy gut, happy mind.
Absolutely. Because going back to the whole hierarchy of needs, you won't die if you're depressed. you will die if you can't digest your food. And so what happens if you're not feeding your gut properly and it's not running as efficiently as it should, your gut literally sucks all of the serotonin out of your blood, which means your brain can't use it anymore and you get depressed. And this has been quite extensively studied. There is a couple of groups that we work with for other things where one of the groups in particular treats depression with diet change. And they've found that 80% of the people that they treat for depression need nothing else than a change of diet, and the depression goes away.
I can completely see why that is. Like, for anything, I always think go to food and exercise first. Do what you can with good nutrition, good sleep, good people, exercise. Then look at supplementation or something first, or even, the thing is with my girls is like gut performance, good nutrition, journaling, mindset kind of work, meditation, bring down the stress. There are so many things that you can do without medical or like synthetic drugs. So it is so interesting that, you can cure depression or some depressions through just really good health. And that's also the same with the menstrual cycle and keeping really bad period pain at bay. The food that you eat is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the hormones that are produced in the menstrual cycle are affected by your diet. So, you're in a situation where if you've got an imbalance, you can potentially address that imbalance by fixing things in your diet and your gut. I mean, one of the things that is very destructive to the way that we do things, and it's certainly been proven to be not true as far as we can work out at the moment, is this idea that things are separate. This idea of, it's all in your head, or you just need to. And one of the things that we're actually very bad at is being able to tell the difference between something that's mental or something that's physical, because they're not separate. I mean, a really simple example of that is it's very hard to tell the difference between whether you're thirsty or hungry, which is why a lot of diets, a lot of these diets say, well, if you're getting hungry, the first thing you need to do is drink a couple of glasses of water because maybe you're dehydrated. But that applies to absolutely everything. I mean, we can't separate depression from a biochemical diet deficiency from stress, because they're not separate. It's all involved. And there's some really extreme examples of that as well, where now for things like, for example, anorexia, there's a group of people, this is still very early stages, but there's a group of people that have shown that if you can actually adjust the microbiota in the guts and things, you lose that negative feedback from the gut. Because remember your gut, as you said, it's a second brain. More information goes up from your gut to your brain than goes down from your brain to your gut. So if your gut is telling you something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, and that's just happening every second of every day, eventually your brain's going to pick something to focus on. And
it's generally a
it'll be
reflection of
anxiety or depression or stress or whatever. But so it's very hard to just treat these things with psychiatry, because you've still got that thing in your gut going, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. You get rid of that impulse, and then all of a sudden the psychiatry works a lot more effectively. I've got, personal examples, people I know who I can, a couple of people I know who have really major anxiety problems, and I can tell when they've eaten the wrong thing. So one of the people I know is wheat intolerant, and I can tell when she's had wheat because she'll be anxious. And I can know nothing about her. I walk in the room, look at her state and go, "You've eaten the wrong thing today, haven't you?" And she'll go, "Yeah, I have." I can tell because you're anxious. When you eat the right thing, you don't get anxious. When you eat the wrong thing, you do get anxious. And that happens all the time. So,
Is that particularly with like intolerances as well? Like
yeah,
that very much shows up, particularly inflammation happens.
Yeah, look, one of the things about biochemistry is Our immune system and our inflammation system is a real Damocles sword, in that if we didn't have it, we'd be dead tomorrow. You know, it's absolutely essential to survival. Our inflammatory system and our immune system, which are basically the same thing, in very general terms. But pretty much everything that goes wrong with us that isn't, you know, a disease or breaking your leg or something like that, goes wrong because of our inflammatory system or our immune system. So yeah, absolutely. Inflammation causes brain, you know, they're now saying that inflammation is probably one of the major players in Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that, because inflammation in the brain stops the brain from working properly, and it causes the plaques potentially. It's one of the theories now. So just getting your inflammatory state down, and that's one of the major sort of outcomes of the gut performance. If you're talking about how does it work, well, it works through prebiotics, it works through micronutrients, it works through having all the different types of fiber. But what it actually does is lower your inflammation. You know, it just brings your inflammation down. Now, one of the major causes of inflammation, of course, is excessive exercise. So it's mechanical cause of inflammation, not immune system or anything like that, but it still has the same outcome. It still causes damage. The reason why you feel pain in your muscles after working out is because of the inflammation caused by not just lactic acid buildup, but the cellular destruction. So when what's on the inside of the cell becomes the outside of the cell, that causes inflammation. So yeah, all of these things are linked to inflammation effectively, and there's definitely a link to it of inflammation to all of these things, and there's probably cause for most of them. If it doesn't cause it, it definitely makes it worse. So, yeah. And a lot of these things like bloating and constipation and things like that are probably more about the bacteria than inflammation, even though inflammation plays a big role in it. But a lot of these things become what we call asymptomatic. So we're always balancing these things off. Like I said, we actually want to have inflammation. Inflammation is a good thing. It defeats opponents. It defeats invaders. It causes the body to
remodel itself,
to repair itself and things like that. But excessive inflammation is when you get problems, what they call chronic or systemic inflammation. And that's when you get things like joint pain and all that kind of stuff. If you reduce the sort of general level of inflammation in your body, you can still have specific benefits happening at the point where it needs to happen. But if you remove it from being just flushing your body in general, then that's when you become what they call asymptomatic. So again, things like arthritis. It's not the damage to your joints which causes the pain, it's the inflammation that causes the pain. If you remove the inflammation, the pain goes away. So, you know, a lot of these things can just be made tolerable, if not vanish, by doing that kind of thing.
I also want to touch base on IBS, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, and what was the other one, Mum? Diverticulitis. But right before that, just talking about inflammation, and I guess I deal with a lot of women, and I feel like women are very stressed in their own minds. But even stress is, you know, stress with work, mothering, getting to the gym, looking after themselves, all that kind of stuff. What can you tell us about stress, emotional stress or eustress on the gut, and what it can do to the microbiome disruption? Yeah,
so that's something that's really interesting that's just sort of come about over the last year to 5 years. And again, this goes back to everything's connected. So the feedback does go both ways. So everybody's heard of the fight or flight response, but there's a number of different responses based with stress. One of the reasons why stress causes a heart attack is because one of the biochemical functions of stress is that your body thickens its blood up. What it does is, when you've got this fight or flight syndrome, it starts flooding the factors in your blood which cause clotting. So if you get wounded, the wound will clot faster, you won't bleed to death. But the process of that causes the blood to thicken. Now, if you've already got plaques in your veins, your heart's not working properly anyway, that thickening of the blood can give you a heart attack. So stress feeds back the same as biological damage feeds forwards to stress. So biological factors cause more stress, and stress causes more biological factors.
Yeah.
And interestingly, this is one of the areas where, for a long time, science has tried to pretend that men and women are not different biochemically. You know, and there's a historical thing, and you know, this is not about value judgments or anything like that. I'm talking purely about the function of our bodies. But this is one area where the biochemical functionality of our bodies is very different, or at least it appears to be at the moment. It's still very early stages. And women are just more prone to these emotional and, I don't want to say mental because it puts a negative connotation on it, which isn't there, but sensual, if you like, responses. So things like, as you say, pregnancy and stress and all the rest has a lot more of a biochemical effect, and vice versa. Whereas for men, it seems at least that it's more of a physical thing, like, you know, having heart attacks and aneurysms and stuff like that. There is obviously a huge amount of crossover in there. I don't want to pretend for 1 second that men don't suffer from the same kind of mental anguish that women do, and women don't suffer from the same kind of physical problems. But I guess one of the great advantages and great disadvantages for women that men don't have is women being more able to at least acknowledge their emotional state means that they can pick up on these things a lot quicker. You know, the whole thing of I feel down, well, maybe what you need to do is think about your diet and exercise. Now, why do people feel better when they exercise and they eat properly? Because things are working properly.
Yes, there's definitely a correlation with that one.
Right, absolutely. Whereas men, to a large part, will just pretend that they've got to suck it up and get on with it. And so they'll do the wrong thing for a lot longer until they get really sick.
Yeah.
Whereas at least women have, generally speaking, again, we're talking generalities, not specifics, will at least be able to realise that that's a warning sign. But of course, the other side of it, the real negative side for women, is they get told, oh, it's all just in your head, don't worry about it. It's not all in your head. There's no such thing as all in your head. There is something that that is not functioning right, that is potentially really easy to fix if you just acknowledge that it's not all in your head. It's
all in your gut.
It's all in your gut, or it's all in your nutrition.
Yeah.
It's something that you can actually take an active role in. And you know, sometimes drugs are absolutely needed for these things. Sometimes they're over the top. But a lot of the time, you can solve the problem before you get to the need for drugs. If you realise and acknowledge that this is something that needs to be changed right now. You know, again, going to the value of pharmaceuticals, is the value that they have is when people have got to the point where they can't fix it with anything else.
Yeah.
You know, it's the potential to become, you know, seriously and medically depressed is quite a long way down the road. It's not something that just happens. It's a cut-off and things like that. And I mean, even things like PTSD and stuff like that are now looking at how changing the diet and things can affect that a lot as well. And you have really great results with that. So my only real piece of advice is acknowledge it. You know, don't pretend that it doesn't happen. Now, there is a certain amount of suck it up because, you know, people get stressed. You know, there's nothing you can do about that. I'm not suggesting that people should sit in a corner and, you know, suck their thumb. But what I'm saying is acknowledge the fact that if the stress is becoming a problem, well, you can control it with your diet and gut, fixing your gut and things.
I often say to the girls, how you see yourself is a reflection of how you've been treating yourself. And so for some women that have, you know, chronic binging habits or any kind of eating disorder issues, when those issues are arising, because generally they come in cycles, like things in life, that's when the anxiety, depression, all that comes up. And it is when they go back to eating a well-balanced diet and going, sticking to their training programs, how quick the effect of, I guess, stressing less and being back in there, I call it in spirit, being back in spirit happens. But my biggest thing was, does, stress and fight or flight have a huge impact on the gut, and does it change the microbiome of the gut?
Yes, absolutely. There is evidence that that's the case. So again, it is a feedback as well. It's not dramatic in the short term, but it probably is in the long term. So yes, it will start to change things. You'll get different hormones, and certainly the result of that stress will change us. So one of the things which is, I said before, we're not really designed to eat sugar. But the bacteria in our gut that love sugar also release serotonin. So that whole comfort food, eating chocolate because I feel it, that is 100% real. But it's not you that you're making happy. It's the bad bacteria in your gut that are then making you happy.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
So definitely the stress and things can change it that way, because we eat garbage food because it makes us feel better, and that changes our microbiome. Now, of course, the problem is as soon as you stop doing it, it's like a drug withdrawal. All of a sudden, the bacteria that are no good for you, they're in a huge population, and they're unhappy because you're not feeding them the junk food anymore. So it's effectively an extremely mild withdrawal. But, there are some people who swear blind that they have to eat chocolate. So it's not necessarily mild, So there's plenty of ways that it can feed back into your microbiome. But it's also, again, because it's a two-way street, if you do something proactive to fix the microbiome, you get rid of these bacteria, they're no longer there. See, one of the things that really happens quite a lot to people who take things like gut performance is they say to us, my sugar cravings are gone. I don't crave sugar anymore. And that's because you're suppressing those bacteria. So those bacteria that are giving you the cravings and the biochemistry that is giving you those cravings is no longer active anymore. So you can force it the other way as well.
When I'm dining for the show, what I would do is first thing in the morning, I would always have gut performance. So I'd have that, meditate. Then after I've done that, I'd have a coffee, blah, blah. But then after dinner, I would always have another dose of gut performance, and I'd mix it with the magnesium powder, because them together was really sweet. And when I wanted something sweet, I was like, well, it's not gonna mess up my macros, and I'm gonna be looking after recovery, the inflammation. So it was and it was sweet. I've always liked something sweet after dinner. So I found that was really useful. But that was really interesting, actually. That whole thing. So I'm going to talk about, I guess, more chronic symptoms or diseases, would you say, Mum? Like IBS isn't a disease. It's a symptom or syndrome. But Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, and diverticulitis are pretty chronic illnesses. Is it safe for people with those illnesses to take gut performance? Yeah,
so safe is an interesting word. It's important to define what we mean by safe. So the short answer is yes. Gut performance is a food. It's foods which have been used for hundreds of years, that they're just used in a particular way, in a special way, to get a particular outcome. So it's not like taking a drug or even overdosing on a vitamin. Vitamin A can kill you if you take too much of it. You literally can't eat enough to kill yourself. Some people have actually tried. So you physically can't consume enough for it to become toxic. So from that regard, yes, it's completely safe. However, like eating too much of anything, it can make you not well. Eating too much gut performance for you would have the same effect of eating too many apples. If you ate a bag full of apples, you would make yourself quite sick. You wouldn't die, but you probably wish you had for a little while at least. So it has the same problems that foods have.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of IBS, IBS is a very diverse group of conditions. It's a sort of a catch-all for anything that we can't give a specific name to. It relates to a lot of different things. So the short answer is we've never found anybody who hasn't benefited from it with IBS. Having said that, there have been some people when they first started taking it, it did make them nauseous and things like that. And they had to reduce the dose and very slowly work their way up on it and things like that. In terms of diverticulitis, again, we haven't had anybody that it hasn't helped. But we haven't had huge numbers of people that have been on it. So you've got to be quite careful about these things. One of the things that I can say is the rules that they give out for these things don't seem to apply to gut performance. So, for example, IBS, they get told don't eat a lot of fibre. Well, gut performance is 80% fibre or something like that. 90% of people with IBS have no problems with taking it, and almost all of them see benefits out of it. So, those kind of rules don't seem to apply. With things like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, you have to be very careful. And the reason for that is they're so compromised. Their guts are just so badly that if you give them anything at all, it will cause problems. So they have to have very controlled diets, and they're typically zero fibre.
Mm-hmm.
We have had some success with a couple of people with ulcerative colitis. We've had a couple of people that said that they had ulcerative colitis and they were fine to take it and they got improvement, but they had very mild cases. They didn't have advanced cases. We've had a couple of people that have had severe ulcerative colitis that we've taken a huge amount of time with, started them on a very small amount using a slippery elm as a sort of a softener to make it really gentle, and slowly work their way up until they were seeing improvement. And they definitely had improvement, didn't make it go away, but they did have improvement. And then we've had a couple of people where they were just so compromised that any amount that we gave them just didn't help. Mm-hmm. With things like ulcerative colitis and any actual disease, I would recommend doing it with your doctor or your dietitian. It's not something that you can generalise about, and we're very uncomfortable with saying yes or no. Take it to your doctor. If you want extra information, we can provide you plenty of information for your doctor or your dietitian or your naturopath or whatever. But on the basis, it works more often than it doesn't. Mm-hmm. And a good deal more often than it doesn't. Yeah. But you've got to be ulcerative colitis particularly is the only situation that we've worked on so far where we've had actual failure to have any kind of benefit to some individuals.
Awesome. This is me speaking now, but do you think gut issues or gut diseases are more prevalent now than they were, say, 30 years ago? And if so, is it because of diet and stress levels? But then if you look back, like there were a lot of women on Mummy's Little Helpers on the Valium as well, so there must have been quite a bit of stress back then as well.
Yeah, I mean, these kind of things are very hard to judge, and I'm always a little bit cautious of people who say yes or no on both sides. Historical data is very poor quality, usually, and these things are so complicated that it's very hard to sort of narrow down cause and effect. Having said that, I mean, one of the classic things that they say about obesity, for example, was obesity was so rare in the 1930s that they didn't even think to measure it.
Wow.
So it wasn't until after the Second World War that the rate of obesity came high enough that people thought it was something worth keeping track of. So definitely things have changed in the last sort of 70 years. Yeah. And that comes down largely to, and again, you've got to look at the history of these things. For 99.9% of human history, the biggest problem we had was starving to death. So everything was about getting calories. All of our food production was about higher yields, ease of transport, so that we could take it from the places that could grow it to the places that couldn't, and all those kind of things. It's only been very recently that we've realised that these micronutrients and everything really matter, and they make a big difference. And that's why diabetes rates have gone up. It's why heart disease rates have gone up, because we just didn't realise that it mattered until very recently. So, you know, it's very hard for me as a scientist to use the word intuitively, but intuitively, yes, it has got worse. And there's a very obvious and real reason for it to have got worse, and that's processing. I mean, take the example of chromium. It's just almost impossible to get chromium out of processed foods because processing destroys the chromium, or at least it makes it unable to be absorbed by our bodies. So, yeah, people are chromium deficient because the food that they eat doesn't have chromium.
Not if you take Gut Performance.
Not if you take Gut Performance.
I am not chromium deficient.
but this is also why this idea of sort of medicinal foods and directed nutrition things is going to become quite big. And we are by no means the only people working on this stuff. I mean, we talk quite a lot with pharmaceutical companies, and every pharmaceutical company in the world has a group working on this stuff. So you know, if the pharmaceutical companies are getting involved, that it's real and it's something that is going to sell a lot of product. You know, they don't sell things for the hell of it. You know, so. And part of the problem with the whole process was, again, historically, because it had such poor regulation and everything, there's a real negative connotation, there's a real us and them kind of attitude, and it really shouldn't be that way. It's all part of the same thing. So yeah, gut problems have got worse, almost certainly. Diabetes, heart disease, all of those things have been measured for 70 years and they've got worse over the last 70 years. And a large part of it comes down to nutrition. And
it's crazy. It's the easiest thing to fix.
No way around. Well, but
in a way,
up until very recently, we didn't realise it was something that needed fixing.
Yeah.
You know, everybody still had. I mean, to give you another example of things that we've done just from a scientific point of view. You know, again, everybody knows blueberries are good for you. They're super rich in antioxidants, all the rest of it. I went to a supermarket, I'm not going to say which one because I don't want to disparage them, picked up a punnet of strawberries, took them back to my lab and analysed the amount of antioxidants were in them. And it had 6% of the antioxidants that everybody says is in blueberries, because these things go off. You know, it probably had all of the antioxidants when they picked the blueberry, but that was a week ago. And these things go off very, very quickly. The half-life of vitamin C in an orange is about 40 hours. Yeah, so what that means is every 40 hours, the amount of vitamin C in the orange goes down to half of what it was. Now, the average amount of time that it takes to get an orange from the tree to your mouth is 7 days. So that means there's somewhere between 10 and 20% of the vitamin C that there was when they picked it.
Yeah.
But it's only just recently that we've understood that this stuff matters. And so this is why we have to go towards foods, why we have to go towards directed nutrition, why we have to do things like gut performance, because it's something that you take with your other good food to give you...
It's a scientifically developed food with purpose.
Yes.
It's there, it works with something. It's not to fix something, it's there to... It is a supplement in a way, so it does supplement what you're doing with your diet and what you're doing with your training and how you treat yourself. And
the way that I like to look at it is it's the last 30%. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you don't look after yourself, if you're at 0%, well, taking gut performance will make you healthier than if you didn't take it. But it's not going to solve the problem. But if you're doing everything that you can right, eating properly, and you're still only getting 70% because that's just the world that we live in. And then you have to make up that last 30%. So the only real way to eat properly is to be a farmer and to eat the food that you grow. Pick it off the plant.
What about frozen fruit and vegetables? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really interesting one, because they have shown quite conclusively that frozen fruit is healthier than fresh fruit.
Did you get some frozen blueberries into the study?
I didn't, but I'm going to. So the reason why the frozen fruit is healthier is because they freeze it as soon as they pick it.
Yeah.
So it comes off the tree straight into the freezer. Whereas the fresh fruit, it's been, and all of these things are heat. They break down in heat. So at room temperature, they just break down over time. They break down in the air. So, they did another one with orange juice where they'd actually fortified the orange juice with vitamin C, opened the lid, and then watched the vitamin C go down over days because the lid was off, because they are antioxidants. The oxygen in the air uses all of the antioxidants. So,
it's so interesting.
but if you freeze it straight away, well, then it's got the breakdown is much slower. So yes, if you are going to go for, of course, with frozen stuff and things, you've got problems of salmonella and things like that. That's been in the news recently, where there've been contaminated berries.
We can't win.
So, but again, that's part of the reason to have things like gut performance, because we test it for things like that. We know that it doesn't have that kind of stuff in it.
Yeah.
We are required to prove that it is good for you.
Yeah.
Would you say it's almost like a pure food?
That's a very good way of looking at it. The way that we kind of describe it is it's a high value food.
Yeah.
It's a high density food. So you've got everybody sort of, particularly in your space, talks about calorie density and stuff like that. Well, there's nutrient density as well. It's a very nutrient dense, very calorie poor food. So it's got almost no usable calories in it at all. I think it's got the same amount of usable calories in it as a teaspoon of sugar or something like that. So it's very calorie poor, but it's very nutrient dense. So it's got literally 10 times the chromium that anything else has got in it, in a form that's not toxic. There's a lot of this stuff about toxicity and things like that. It's very high in antioxidants and things like that. It's the equivalent of 3 times as much as a cup of tea and stuff like that in one serve and things like that. So it's very high in those, very high density in those kind of things. And that's really kind of when we're talking about the practicality of things, the difference between, let's go back to something like psyllium husk, for example, and blood glucose levels. They have absolutely shown that psyllium husk will lower blood glucose levels if you eat 20 grams of it a day. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but I could not force 20 grams. I don't know how they got the people to do it in the study, but as soon as you've not got somebody standing over you saying, eat that psyllium husk, you are not going to eat 20 grams a day. With the 7 gram serve, you get enough of the stuff. So it's the density that is really important. You can get all of this stuff from other sources. It's just not practical. What makes the gut performance work is it's there in the tub, in the scoop that you can put in your shake, or you can add to a glass of water and drink with a meal to boost everything up. So it's the practicality that makes it valuable, not necessarily. Nothing that's in it is magic or special or different from the point of view that this is all stuff that we've known about for a while. And we didn't realise how important it was, but we knew that it happened. It's just that very few things have it in a package that you can actually make use of it in a short period of time in a convenient way.
Would you say, I have mine first in the morning, would you say it's better to have it with food, or is it okay on its own?
Look, I have it on its own. I think it matters a lot to the person. So particularly if you've got gut issues and stuff, it is easier to take with food. If you're looking to things like losing weight and controlling your blood glucose levels and stuff, well, it does lower the GI of foods if you take it with food. So it lowers the glycemic index, So, a piece of white bread has the equivalent GI as a piece of wholemeal bread if you have a glass of gut performance at the same time. So there are definite benefits to having it with meals, and certainly the recommended is with the morning and the evening meal. But is it terrible if you don't take it, or do you not get the benefits if you don't take it with a meal? No, you still absorb the nutrients if you take it without food. You just get added. One of the things that we do know happens is if you take other nutrient sources with it, you absorb them more effectively. So things like one of the people I work with, zinc deficiency is very important to the people that they work with.
What about iron? would it be a good tablet? A lot of people, they take iron tablets, but they don't quite absorb it unless you have it with vitamin C.
Yeah, well, it's actually got a little bit of iron in it anyway.
Okay.
So yes, certainly that's true. It doesn't seem to be any nutrients that it inhibits that we've found, which again is quite unusual because, you know, a lot of the sort of phytic acids and things like that cause problems with nutrient absorption. It does seem to aid the absorption. So zinc's a really interesting one because, it's very hard to absorb in the tablet form.
Yeah.
And in fact toxic to some people.
Yeah.
And we found that if they take their zinc tablets with the gut performance, they need to take less tablets to get the same amount of zinc in their blood.
Wow.
That was for a specific group, but there's no reason to believe that it's not true of everybody. So taking it with meals or taking it with your other supplements, so mixing it in with a shake or whatever, where you're putting all of the magnesium and everything as well, is probably a good idea.
Perfect.
But again, I mean, I basically take it when I get up. Get up, mix it in, and often I just won't eat until sort of mid-morning because if you don't feel hungry. I mean, I've got some fat reserves that I can draw. Someone like yourself without any fat reserves to draw on might not find it works that way, but I certainly do.
160 kilos.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the case. And things like protein shakes and stuff like that. One of the real common problems with protein shakes is constipation. Not just because of the fact that there's no fibre in most of them, but because the actual process of absorbing and digesting the protein causes imbalances. So there's a lot of people I know that use it to stop having problems from having protein shakes. So if they use a protein shake as one of their meals or anything like that, they almost always take it at the same time as a protein shake, and they find that they get much more out of those kind of shakes. So
awesome.
That would be what I'd recommend it in that kind of situation.
Awesome. Thanks, Malcolm. That was awesome.